Your mission, should you choose to accept it. Mission Impossible wasn't just another summer blockbuster. It was chaos wrapped in secrecy, stitched together by last-minute rewrites, dangerous stunts, and studio panic. What audiences saw was a sleek spy thriller. What they didn't see, cast meltdowns, exploding budgets, near-fatal stunts, and a director on the brink of collapse. Today, we're uncovering 20 weird facts about Mission Impossible 1996, the film that launched a billion-dollar franchise, but nearly imploded before it even premiered. And wait until you hear the bonus fact, a secret so wild it nearly erased Ethan Hunt from the screen forever. Let's begin. A script with no ending mission, Impossible went into production without a finished script. Brian De Palma began shooting elaborate action sequences, while the writers scrambled to figure out the plot. Entire pages were delivered the morning of filming. Tom Cruise later admitted, "We were making it up as we went along. It wasn't chaos, it was controlled improvisation." But it meant actors often didn't know why their characters were doing certain things until months later. The finale inside the Channel Tunnel, it wasn't fully written until the movie was nearly in the editing room. Not a blueprint, but a puzzle being solved in real time. The result was a film that feels disjointed yet electric, a spy thriller that mirrors its own production, uncertain, dangerous, and unpredictable. What audiences didn't know, they weren't just watching a script, they were watching survival. De Palma versus the writers. The film's creative tug-of-war was brutal. Screenwriters David Koepp and Robert Towne often clashed with Brian De Palma, who openly mocked their dialogue and demanded rewrites on the spot. Towne, who was hired for $1 million just to polish the script, later confessed the atmosphere was toxic. De Palma, a perfectionist, cut dialogue-heavy scenes in favor of pure visual storytelling, leaving writers furious. Paramount grew alarmed at his obsession with style over clarity. It wasn't writer versus director, it was survival of vision. And the result? A film critics still debate. Brilliant minimalism or incoherent spectacle. Either way, the scars of those fights shaped the movie into a stylish, fragmented thriller that feels more like a fever dream than a traditional spy film. The war behind the camera bled into the paranoia on screen. The train scene nearly killed it. The high-speed train climax is iconic, but it almost destroyed production. De Palma insisted on practical effects, shooting Tom Cruise on top of a real train racing at 200 miles per hour. French authorities refused, insurance companies panicked, Paramount executives begged for miniatures, but Cruise refused to back down. He trained on wind tunnels and studied airflow until he could withstand hurricane-level gusts. Filming required him to crouch within inches of live electrical wires. The danger wasn't cinematic, it was real. One wrong move, and the star would have been electrocuted or blown off the train. Instead, Cruise pulled it off, cementing his reputation as the actor willing to risk everything. Not special effects, not green screen, just raw danger. Audiences saw thrilling spectacle, what they didn't see, an actor flirting with death, simply to prove it could be done. Emilio Estevez's vanishing act. Emilio Estevez was a surprise addition to the IMF team, but even more shocking was how quickly he was erased. His character, Jack Harmon, meets a gruesome fate in the elevator shaft. But Estevez later revealed his role was meant to be larger, possibly recurring in sequels. Paramount executives cut him out, fearing Estevez's star power might distract from Cruise. His death scene was filmed with brutal realism, the crushing spikes making audiences squirm. Not cameo, but sacrifice. Estevez was written out so fast he wasn't even credited in the promotional campaign. His erasure became Hollywood legend, the man who almost became a franchise regular, reduced to a forgotten corpse in the film's opening act. Fans still ask, what if Emilio Estevez had survived? The answer? The mission. Impossible franchise might look very different today. Jon Voight's villain twist angered fans. Casting Jon Voight as Jim Phelps, the leader of the IMF, was a nod to the original TV series. But De Palma made a brutal choice, turning him into the villain. Fans of the 1960 Seconds show were outraged. Phelps had been the embodiment of loyalty and leadership. Turning him into a traitor felt like betrayal. The surviving cast of the original series condemned the decision. Peter Graves, who played Phelps on TV, refused to cameo after learning the twist. Not homage, but desecration. De Palma defended the move, saying betrayal was at the heart of espionage. But for longtime fans, it was the moment Mission Impossible burned its bridge with its own legacy. The controversy set the tone. This wasn't your father's spy show. This was a darker, crueler universe, one where even heroes could be traitors. Cruise's obsession with authenticity. Tom Cruise wasn't just starring, he was producing, and his obsession with realism shaped every frame. He rejected stunt doubles for key sequences, insisting on performing wire drops, break-ins, and rooftop chases himself. The vault heist scene, where he dangles inches above the floor, wasn't just choreography, it was agony. Cruise's harness cut into his ribs, forcing him to balance his body like a plank for endless takes. He even stuffed coins in his shoes to steady himself against gravity. Not acting, but endurance. De Palma reportedly filmed over 50 takes, each time demanding less shaking, more stillness. What audiences didn't realize they weren't watching a performance? They were watching Cruise's willpower against human biology. That single moment, sweat dripping as he hovered in silence, became the DNA of the entire franchise. Brutal realism, no matter the cost. The Prague Chaos. The film's opening in Prague wasn't just atmospheric, it was a logistical nightmare. Cold streets, centuries-old architecture, and local bureaucracy nearly brought production to a halt. De Palma wanted authentic cobblestone alleys, but Prague city officials restricted filming times to avoid disrupting tourism. Cruise shot overnight, often racing dawn. The Charles Bridge sequence was especially brutal, as freezing temperatures pushed equipment and actors to breaking point. Cruise and his co-stars filmed drenched in icy rain, teeth chattering between takes. Not glamour, but grit. Locals complained about helicopters rattling windows at 3 a.m., while production managers scrambled to keep the Czech government appeased. Yet, the atmosphere captured on film, the cold, paranoid stillness of Eastern Europe, gave the movie a unique tone. What could have been a disaster became a cinematic advantage, as Prague's haunting streets turned into a character of their own. De Palma's fury at the studio. If there's one constant in Mission Impossible's production, it was Brian De Palma's war with Paramount. Studio executives pushed for more dialogue, more clarity, more exposition. De Palma refused, insisting the film should be visual storytelling with minimal explanation. Daily meetings exploded into shouting matches. Executives accused him of making the film too confusing for audiences. De Palma shot back, "Confusion is part of espionage." The tension peaked when Paramount demanded extra dialogue be looped in post-production, angering both De Palma and Cruise. Not compromise, but collision. The final cut is a strange hybrid silent heist sequences sitting alongside clunky lines of exposition. What audiences didn't know. They were watching a battle-scarred artifact, stitched together by competing visions. Yet somehow, the film's fractured nature only added to its myth an action film that felt as paranoid as the world it depicted. Vanessa Redgrave's improvised seduction. Vanessa Redgrave wasn't just acting, she was improvising. Her character, arms dealer Max, became unforgettable thanks to her sly, almost flirtatious energy with Tom Cruise. But much of that wasn't in the script. De Palma encouraged Redgrave to play with the role, and she added an unnerving mix of charm and menace. Cruise himself looked visibly surprised in some takes, as Redgrave leaned in close, brushing off CIA-level threats with aristocratic amusement. Not written, but discovered on set. The chemistry created something unique. A villain who felt untouchable not because of brute force, but because of her elegance. Critics later singled her out as the most fascinating character in the film, proof that improvisation could elevate cold spy thriller mechanics into something sensual and dangerous. Behind the sleek editing was a simple truth. Redgrave stole her scenes by rewriting them in real time. The elevator kill that shocked Paramount. The elevator death of Emilio Estevez's character was so graphic it almost got cut. Test audiences recoiled at the spiked ceiling crushing his skull, some reportedly covering their eyes. Paramount panicked, fearing the brutality would turn audiences off. De Palma, however, refused to tone it down. He argued the sequence needed to set the stakes. Anyone could die. Not PG action, but horror. Cruise backed De Palma, saying the IMF's betrayal needed a shocking visual to drive home the danger. Against all odds, the studio relented. The death stayed. It remains one of the most disturbing moments in the franchise, a cold, mechanical execution with no mercy, and it set the tone for what Mission Impossible would become, a series where even allies aren't safe. And before we dive into the next 10 shocking facts, go ahead and like and subscribe, because just like Ethan Hunt's missions, the secrets only get more dangerous from here. The vault heist almost failed. Technically, the Langley vault sequence is the film's crown jewel, but pulling it off was brutal. Cruise was suspended on a wire system so sensitive that the slightest shift caused him to swing like a pendulum. The crew struggled to balance his body so he wouldn't crash into the floor. At one point, Cruise kept tipping forward. His solution? He stuffed coins into his shoes to act as counterweights. Not CGI, but mechanical ingenuity. Lighting was another nightmare. De Palma insisted on the sterile glow of fluorescent tubes, but every reflection risked exposing camera equipment. Cinematographer Stephen Burham had to angle lights with surgical precision. What audiences saw was grace and silence. What they didn't see: sweat, improvisation, and hundreds of takes. That impossible drop wasn't just cinematic tension. It was a real battle against physics itself. The CIA didn't approve Mission Impossible isn't exactly a flattering look at intelligence agencies. The CIA reportedly refused to cooperate with Paramount, refusing location access or script approval. The studio had to build its own Langley interiors from scratch, relying on second-hand blueprints and artistic guesses. De Palma doubled down, painting the CIA as bureaucratic and paranoid, a place where betrayal thrived in shadowed hallways. Not endorsement, but exposure. The irony? The more the CIA resisted, the more authentic the film felt. The secrecy added paranoia. Rumors later circulated that intelligence officers privately hated the film for undermining their mystique. Yet in a strange twist, the rejection made the story feel sharper, more dangerous. Mission Impossible wasn't a propaganda piece. It was a critique dressed as spectacle. And that independence helped the film carve its own ruthless identity. Exploding fish tanks terrified Cruise. The restaurant fish tank explosion became one of the film's most iconic moments and one of its most dangerous. Over 16 tons of water were rigged to crash down around Cruise in a split-second stunt. Safety officers begged against it. Cruise insisted. De Palma only allowed one take because once those tanks shattered, the set would be destroyed. When the water burst, it slammed into Cruise like a tidal wave, nearly dragging him into broken glass. Not visual trickery, but raw force. Crew members screamed as the wave flooded electrical wiring, forcing an emergency shutdown. Cruise emerged coughing, soaked, but unhurt. Audiences saw sleek spy coolness. What they didn't know, one misstep could have drowned the star in his own stunt. That single moment became a defining symbol. Mission Impossible doesn't fake danger. It weaponizes it. The train finale was almost miniatures. Paramount originally demanded the train sequence be filmed with miniatures and rear projection. De Palma hated the idea, calling it television-level fakery. Cruise sided with him, insisting the scene be shot practically on a real TGV train in France. Negotiations dragged for months as insurance firms refused coverage. The compromise? A hybrid. Real train footage, live stunt work, and limited blue screen for impossible shots. Not model trains, not full CGI, but a dangerous hybrid stitched together with precision. The wind tunnel work was especially insane. Cruise was blasted with winds at 140 miles per hour while dangling inches from steel track. His goggles blew off in early tests, forcing adjustments. What audiences saw was seamless spectacle. What they didn't know, half the sequence nearly collapsed under studio compromise. That stubborn insistence on realism set the franchise's DNA. Impossible, but real. Critics called it confusing nonsense. When Mission Impossible premiered, reviews were brutal. Many critics slammed the plot as incoherent, accusing De Palma of sacrificing story for style. Roger Ebert famously called it a mess of a movie, while Entertainment Weekly dismissed it as empty spectacle, not universal praise, but divided fury. Yet audiences disagreed. The film grossed over $450 million worldwide, proving style could overpower narrative clarity. Paramount executives were stunned. De Palma's fractured storytelling, once a liability, became the film's secret weapon. Fans embraced the paranoia, the betrayals, the visual flair. What critics saw as incoherence, audiences felt as tension. The divide only grew sharper over time. Mission Impossible wasn't about explaining every detail. It was about creating a spy nightmare that felt dangerous because it refused to play by Hollywood rules. What started as chaos became cult genius. De Palma walked away from sequels. Brian De Palma didn't return for Mission Impossible 2, and the reason was brutal. He hated the studio interference. According to interviews, Paramount executives meddled so heavily in the editing room that De Palma felt the final film wasn't fully his. It wasn't filmmaking, he reportedly said. It was committee making, not artistic triumph, but compromise. Cruise respected De Palma, but knew the franchise needed directors willing to embrace constant studio oversight. De Palma refused, leaving behind a stylish, paranoid masterpiece, but also a trail of burned bridges. His absence marked a turning point. The franchise became less about moody espionage and more about high-octane action. What audiences didn't realize they were watching the first and last De Palma spy film, a one-of-a-kind experiment the franchise would never replicate. The paranoia left with him, the spectacle remained. The budget war Mission Impossible started with a $40 million budget. By the time filming wrapped, costs ballooned to over $80 million. What caused the chaos? Endless rewrites, location struggles, and De Palma's perfectionism. Paramount executives panicked as dailies revealed expensive sequences with little narrative clarity. The fish tank stunt alone cost nearly $1 million. Insurance companies nearly pulled out after Cruise's train stunt rehearsal. Not smooth production, but hemorrhaging money. Yet Cruise, as producer, fought for every penny, arguing the spectacle would justify the expense. He was right, the film grossed over 5 times its budget. What looked like reckless overspending was, in hindsight, an investment in building a billion-dollar franchise. Still, behind the box office numbers, executives whispered about a disaster barely avoided. Mission Impossible's financial legacy? Risk everything, spend everything, and hope audiences buy into the madness. The sound design, trickery. The heist scene's silence wasn't just cinematic choice, it was radical sound design. De Palma ordered nearly all background noise stripped away, leaving only the faint hum of wires and Cruise's breath. Sound engineers panicked. They warned audiences might assume the theater audio had failed. Not error, but brilliance. The silence created unbearable tension, forcing every movement, every beat of sweat to echo like a gunshot. In an era where action films blasted nonstop explosions, Mission Impossible dared to go quiet. The gamble worked. The vault sequence became one of the most iconic set pieces in cinema history. What audiences didn't know, technicians fought to keep it, fearing executives would force music overlays. Instead, silence became the soundtrack of suspense. A scene about stillness became louder than any explosion and redefined how action films used sound. Tom Cruise nearly passed out. During the vault drop, Cruise's physical endurance was pushed to the breaking point. The harness cut off circulation when he hung motionless for long periods. Crew members recalled him going pale, his hands trembling as blood flow slowed. In one take, he reportedly blacked out for a moment before being lowered down. Not controlled stunt, but a flirtation with unconsciousness. Cruise refused to quit, demanding take after take until De Palma finally had the perfect stillness. For audiences, it was a moment of cool-headed control. Behind the camera, it was near collapse. That dedication became both legend and warning. Cruise's commitment to realism walked the line between genius and madness. What audiences applauded as discipline was, in reality, a brush with medical danger. Ethan Hunt wasn't the only one hanging by a thread. The franchise almost ended here today. Mission Impossible is a global juggernaut, but in 1996, Paramount wasn't convinced it deserved sequels. The critical backlash, ballooning budget, and production chaos made executives nervous. Cruise had to personally lobby for continuation, arguing the brand had infinite potential. Not certainty, but gamble. The studio reluctantly greenlit a sequel 4 years later, handing it to John Woo. The shift in tone from De Palma's paranoia to Woo's operatic action was deliberate. Paramount wanted distance from the confusing first film. What audiences didn't realize, Mission Impossible almost remained a one-off experiment. Had it not grossed $450 million, Ethan Hunt would have vanished into cinematic history after a single outing. Instead, that chaotic first entry became the imperfect cornerstone of a franchise still breaking box office records decades later. The alternate ending that never was, the original script didn't end on the train. Early drafts placed the climax in a Swiss ski resort, with Hunt battling assassins on a collapsing gondola. Budget concerns killed the idea, and De Palma replaced it with the Channel Tunnel finale. But fragments of the gondola sequence still exist in concept art and crew anecdotes. Not abandoned scene, but ghost ending. Had it been filmed, the franchise might have leaned more into Bond-like exoticism rather than gritty realism. The train sequence, born out of compromise, became legendary. The gondola was lost, but whispers of it still circulate among fans. Mission Impossible's true ending wasn't planned. It was improvised, fought for, and salvaged. And that spirit chaos reshaped into spectacle remains the series' true legacy. Mission Impossible 1996 wasn't just a spy thriller. It was chaos turned into cinema, a production that survived betrayals, stunts gone wrong, and scriptless madness. What could have been a disaster became the seed of a billion-dollar franchise. And maybe that's the real mission, to turn the impossible into legend. If you enjoyed uncovering these secrets, hit that like button, subscribe for more behind-the-scenes revelations, and remember, some missions are too good to walk away from.